true that the monsoon is late, maybe a week to 10 days late. I want to mention to you that just because the monsoon is 1 week late doesn't mean that it's going to have a hugely negative effect.
Rainfall is expected that there will be better rainfall in next week onwards.
The first 2 weeks of July that are quite significant from the effectiveness or the adequacy of monsoons are concerned.
Welcome back. You're with We Mean Business. The poor monsoon now beginning to worry India's policymakers. The delays intensifying worries of a shortfall in the summer sown crops, which may lead to higher prices despite the adequate grain stocks that India seems to have. And of course, monsoon rains are also a key determinant of rural incomes and consumer spending. On the show today, we ask, how badly will the poor monsoon impact India's growth? Joining me on the show today, we've got Mr. Jatin Singh, founder and CEO of SkyMet Weather Services, with us here in the Delhi studio. We've got Mr. DK Joshi, Chief Economist and Senior Director of Crisil. Also, Mr. Gurnam Arora, Joint MD of Kohinoor Foods, also with us here in the Delhi studio. And we've got Mr. PK Mishra, former Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, joining us from Ahmedabad. Dr. Gopal Nayak, Professor of the Center for Public Policy and joining us from Bangalore. Thank you all for being with us here on the show. Let me start by first going to Jatin to make sense of what the latest numbers are looking like. How badly off are we with regard to those deficient rains?
As of the 4th, our country as a whole is running at a minus 30%. Of the long-term period average, which is 89 centimeters, 890 millimeters. Northeast is minus 13, Central India is minus 33, South is minus 27, and North India is right now running at a minus 71%. The situation is grim.
Minus 71%
Yes.
in North India.
Yes.
He's saying the situation is grim. Mr. Joshi, would you echo his views that the situation is really grim? Is there any need to start panicking about these numbers?
Well, I think the start is definitely bad, but I think previously we've seen years when monsoon started off badly but ended up being okay. I mean, the year was 2010, but sometimes it starts well, but the whole doesn't end up as being as good. So I think I would still not press the panic button, but you have to be worried and you have to keep your fingers crossed, because I think we really have to see how the monsoons pan out in the month of July, which is the most critical month. So I won't press the panic button, but one has to be prepared now.
All right, Mr. PK Mishra, take us through the kind of impact that we can see with regard to the overall growth, the impact that we can see on the crops particularly. How dependent are we really on the monsoon as an economy now?
No doubt the monsoon has been delayed this time. Many parts of the country, they have very scanty or deficient rainfall, but it is still there is time, and one cannot reach the conclusion that the situation is really very serious, because in the past there have been years when the monsoon has been delayed. Because I feel that if we have good rains during the next 1 week or so, which is widely spread almost in most parts of the country, then it is possible to have a reasonably good season. The other point I would like to make is that India is a very, very vast country with agroclimatic variation. Every year there will be some areas where then there can be scanty rainfall, as long as it is limited to a very small area. I mean small in the sense that 1 or 2 states, but for the country as a whole, if the overall rainfall is reasonably adequate, then there may not be any threat of drought.
Mr. Gurnam Arora, if I could make sense of what the government has been maintaining so far, they are saying that there is no reason to panic. They have a contingency plan in place, and the buffer stock that they keep talking about, is that reason enough why nobody should be worried about a deficient monsoon?
I endorse their point of view.
there's nothing to panic. We still have some time to go. And like he said, that the best thing is that we have enough stocks in our warehouses. So there can be, even if it's a bad year, still we can manage. Secondly, in North India, I'm talking about rice. If sown is delayed, then we can throw basmati rice, because that's a late crop.
Sure.
That you can do it even in end of July or early August. So we have seen that wherever we had a deficit rain, basmati has been more.
So alternate crops is
Alternate crop is there. So that's a more value added product to us. So I think there's nothing to panic.
Dr. Nayak, are India's farmers really geared up to what Mr. Arora is telling us, the alternate crops and a worst case scenario that may be a terribly deficient monsoon, a drought perhaps, where we can make use of the alternate crops and ensure that the situation isn't all that bad?
Well, in certain parts of the country, farmers are prepared to deal with small changes in the weather conditions and so on, whereas in the large part of the country, especially in the dry regions, we need lot more inputs, lot more support from the institutions, agriculture, universities and government, to support them to make proper choice of crops, as well as cultivation practices, moisture conservation measures, as well as our preparedness in terms of dealing with these changes in the monsoon conditions or weather conditions.
The preparedness is something that obviously will determine how we really do. But Jatin, take us through some of the other numbers that you have, comparison data perhaps from the previous years, and how July could really be the determining factor here.
You see, if you split monsoon, you're looking at 17% in June, 33% in July, 33% in August, another 17 or 18% in September.
Which is why perhaps what Mr. Joshi is saying, that the 17% in June that we're talking about isn't good enough to actually predict the trend.
But you're looking at today we're sitting on the 6th.
6th
right?
of July already.
6th of July, you're running
Right.
at a minus 30%.
Right.
This is 33% of rainfall is going to come in this month. This is one of the big months of monsoon. Now if you look at the short range forecast, and if you look at my systems, probably in the next couple of days, the area around Gwalior and MP and probably Delhi is going to get some rainfall. And when that peters out, I don't see any major system either in the Arabian Sea or Bay of Bengal that can really bring the kind of waters to make up for this kind of deficit. You need to understand, minus 30% in a 130-year average, India will get 70% of its rainfall. So a recovery statistically has to happen, but you're at the lower edge of it. So I think, and looking at the next, say, week or so, you see this week was the week of hope. Okay,
and there's been disappointment clearly in this week.
Somewhat the convection has been weak.
Right.
Bombay was raining, and yes, there has been rain in MP. Last night.
Today, Chandigarh and other parts of North India have seen, but not good enough.
The kind of amounts.
Right.
This is monsoon rainfall. You're looking at 40-50 millimeters of rain. And in Delhi, we haven't seen one good pre-monsoon shower to indicate that this works for us. So I personally, and our forecast is that 85% probability of below normal this year.
Yeah.
Okay, with a 40% chance of drought, but I would still stick to, at this point of time,
40% chance of drought is what you're saying.
Yes, that is significantly
and
high.
And an 85% chance of below normal.
Yes.
Below normal is almost a given now, Mr. Joshi. Is that correct?
Well, it would be somewhere around that. Below normal definition is around 10%.
So
even
below
a
normal is 90 to 94% of the LPA.
Yeah.
And drought is less than when it starts crossing beyond 10% of the LPA. And you also need, and one of the things that, and SkyMet and our scientific research says that you can try many parameters, but as time goes by, we need to understand that if it's an El Nino year, okay,
right,
the 60% of all droughts in India historically have happened in El Nino years. All the droughts 2002, 2003, 2009 were El Nino years. Only in the, I wouldn't say only, but in a year that you go from an El Nino to another El Nino, the chance of drought is less. We have known, if you look at, it's all open source information. If you look at the CPC's data or the NASA NOAA data, El Nino, and it also has to be an evolving El Nino stage. Okay, if you have an established El Nino, that is a different scenario. But right now we have evolved in the Pacific region 3.4 from an ENSO neutral to an El Nino. This is like,
explain to our viewers. Explain to our viewers. It gets technical here on.
There is a body of water off the coast of Pura. I'm really simplifying it.
Yeah.
Okay, If it is normal, there is a normal chance of failure or success of monsoon. If it is La Nina, like last year, there is a chance of excess rain. Because what happens is, if the body of water is warm, then the precipitation happens in that area and it weakens the monsoon currents in all across, say, East Asia and of course monsoon. Now, this is the year where the precipitation is going to be there. So it's going to suck away a lot of the energy across the globe and especially around the monsoon. And that is how the mechanics work. I'm very simplifying it. So this is one of those years. And it has to be evolving. Okay. So the waters are warming up and it peaks in September. Okay. So in textbooks, probabilities, this is likely one of those years, difficult years for India.
A difficult year for India coming at a time, Mr. Joshi, when we're already seeing very, very difficult times. We're seeing India's economy having slowed down considerably. There's been policy paralysis that has already impacted the overall growth. We've seen interest rates not coming down, and that's not helping the situation. How badly do you think a poor monsoon can impact India's overall growth story?
Well, I think monsoon or agriculture is no more the mover of growth because its share in GDP is shrinking. But in a bad year,
what is the share now? We're talking about 15%.
15%, yeah.
But in a bad year, it can make matters worse.
Absolutely. I mean, right now there are so many clouds in the horizon which we don't want, but we want this cloud.
Some other clouds we want clearly,
and which are missing. So I think if we get a bad monsoon, GDP will obviously get hit. But more than that, I think it's the inflation story, because food inflation has again gone up to double digits, and within that, I'm not worried about rice or wheat, because rice and wheat, as was said, we have enough buffer stocks. But look at the inflation in the coarse cereals which the poor consume, jowar, bajra, it's around 14-15%. Look at pulses. I think it's been consistently, inflation has been high. So I think these are the crops which have been hit, sowing has been hit till now, and I think, and these are rain dependent. I think
completely independent.
Absolutely, pulses.
So let's start talking numbers, Mr. Joshi. Let's look at a worst case and a best case scenario and talk about how the possibility of a terrible monsoon or a drought can impact growth and inflation. If you have any numbers at the top of your mind.
Well, I think very broadly, I think if you get a drought here, then 50 to 70 basis points from the growth could be shaved off. So what it means is, instead of 6.5% growth, you will get 5.8% growth, something like that.
Those numbers are clearly terrible to be growing below 6%, and monsoon could have that direct impact of pulling down India's growth below 6% possibly.
Provided it pans out that way.
It pans out that way. We're talking worst case here.
Yeah, and inflation, I think it's a real worry, because inflation is already inching up, and I think it can make the overall inflation touch double digits again. I mean, so that's the risk if you have a very bad monsoon.
And food inflation in particular?
Food inflation is already in double digits. I mean, it's already
so
close
what are the numbers we're looking at there if we see a drought-like situation?
Hard to predict, but I think the rice and wheat will still be okay, but the others one will start spiking. I mean, depending on the extent of severity of monsoon.
And it's a spiral really, Mr. Joshi, because once inflation starts inching upwards, it becomes even more difficult for the central bank to look at cutting rates. So then we're going to see again the growth slow down. So it's really a vicious circle out there.
Absolutely. I think we are speculating right now, but yeah, I think if in case inflation inches up, then I think what you also have is that now wages are also indexed to inflation. The NREGA wages go up. That sets the benchmark for rural wages. And rural wages have been rising very fast in the last couple of years. So I think there is a chance of wage price spiral again.
The wage price spiral, and also rural incomes going down means FMCG companies definitely take a hit. The overall consumer demand is depressed in the rural areas.
Well, I want to make a point here. I mean, I think just that the rural economy is no longer synonymous with agriculture, because I think rural economy has been growing faster than agriculture. There are other drivers in the rural economy. Rural wages have been rising at about 20% per annum, which has created a lot of demand for goods and services. And also I think the schemes like NREGA have provided a cushion to rural wages. So I think what we might miss is the incremental kick to demand that comes from a good monsoon. I think that is what the FMCG companies would be looking for. That would be missing in a bad monsoon year. The rural demand will not collapse.
Will not collapse even if we are in a drought situation. Yeah. Dr. Nayak, would you agree with that view? Because that's a very interesting point that Mr. Joshi has brought about here. The fact that we're now delinking agriculture and monsoon particularly to rural incomes. That's a very positive trend, at least in a drought year, because we're not going to see a depressed demand clearly in the rural areas.
Well, I think we also have to look at the other rural based industry, how they are dependent on agriculture. If they are actually dependent on agriculture for raw materials and so on, and if there is a drought and the production is low and prices are high, often it actually affects the rural based industries as well, except for artisans and so on. And also whenever there is drought, that affects the power supply, hydroelectric power production, and therefore the power supply. And when there is a shortage of power, it's the rural area which is going to be hit much harder, which also means that the rural industry is going to be hit much harder. So therefore, there is a connection between all these, not only just the crop production, but also there are other factors influencing the rural economy, which is indirectly related to monsoon and agricultural production. So therefore, I think we cannot just directly say that okay, it's only 15% of the total economy, and therefore even if it is, let's say there is a reduction of a percentage point less in the growth rate of agriculture, is not going to be so substantial. Only thing is, yes, we have good buffer stock, and therefore it may not affect the availability of cereals. But certainly it's going to affect the production of pulses and oil seeds, and the prices of these two category of food is going to go up. And also, if there is a severe drought, it's going to affect the availability of water later on, which means that even the fruits vegetable production is going to go down. Along with that, the groundwater may be low, and therefore groundwater availability is less, which means that again the vegetable production will be low and the vegetable prices will go up. So there are a lot more linkages than what we think in terms of impact of the monsoon on the agriculture sector, as well as its impact on the total economy.
All right, let's talk food inflation in particular, Mr. Arora, and that's where we need your inputs. How much will a situation like this really impact food prices?
You see, if we talk about rice and wheat, like I said, we are very comfortable. We have never been so comfortable as we are today.
Right.
Because we had 3 consecutive good monsoons.
And so we have a real buffer stock.
And right now, if you ask me, we have a problem in storage.
A problem of plenty.
Plenty.
You're right.
We have problem in storage.
Right.
And that's why the government has allowed 2 million tons of wheat to be exported.
We'll in fact discuss that in detail as well.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think we have to wait and watch before we panic and feel that what is going to happen. But I think everything should be okay, because we have comfortable stocks, and we are going to export. We are going to, whatever surplus we have, we are going to export, and then we can import whatever is required, and to maintain the prices in the domestic market.
So food prices in that sense will not skyrocket. Is something that should be ruled out at least right now.
I don't think so.
All right, but an interesting point that Mr. Gurnam Arora has clearly raised here is the decision of the government to actually go ahead and allow the export of wheat. Does that make economic sense or not? Well, at least for now, food activists seem to be up in arms with that decision, saying, why are you exporting wheat grains when there is such a need for the food grains to be actually given out and distributed to India's poor? Let's actually look at this story by Kate Kiangre.
2 million tons of wheat that could be exported as cattle fodder as millions go hungry in India. Right to food activists have written to the Prime Minister slamming a cabinet panel's move to allow wheat exports for the first time in 10 years. Activists say they are appalled that the government is subsidizing wheat exports to do away with stocks rather than distribute it to India's starving millions. Subsidized exports essentially mean India is taking a conscious policy decision to provide subsidized cattle fodder in industrialized countries. The government must ask states to immediately distribute grains by universalizing the public distribution system, particularly in the 200 poorest districts of the country.
There's so much of hunger, so much of malnutrition. The cabinet knows itself that more than 50% people who ought to be in BPL are not in BPL. So we are saying remove this APL, BPL, universalize, just give everybody grain.
The government has a stock of more than 82 million metric tons of food grains but can store only 64 million metric tons. The excess simply left to rot. In a scathing comment, the Supreme Court called it a crime to waste even a grain of food in a country where people are starving. Though government officials refused to speak on camera, the Act said that there are problems with the distribution system, but there are also practical difficulties and their hands are tied. The subsidy cost already is at 88,000 crore rupees, and though 50 lakh tons are earmarked for the poorest districts, states only lift about 30 lakh tons. The government says it is following the recommendations of the Rangarajan committee appointed by the Prime Minister. But activists cite the experience of 2002. When food grain from India was exported as cattle fodder overseas, though thousands here didn't get a decent meal on their plate. In New Delhi, Ketki Angre for NDTV.
It's an interesting debate really as to whether the government should be allowing wheat exports at a time when there is obviously need for the food grain to be distributed. But remember, the government also has serious issues with regard to storage of food grain. And Mr. Gurnam Arora, if you could shed light on the kind of distribution problems that we've been seeing, and also the point that has been raised by food activists about allowing wheat exports, is that a valid argument?
You see, it's a question of that whether you can store the wheat which you have. We cannot. We have been, the government has been quite active in making warehouses, but not enough. It will take 2-3 years. But if you waste that,
why not distribute it to the poor is what the activists are saying. Why export it?
Well, that's not my policy.
Yeah.
I can't comment on that.
Yeah, right.
But right now is whatever you have surplus, you should export it, then wasting it here, and then import what you require.
Mr. Joshi, if I could get your views on that interesting debate. Activists actually writing to the Prime Minister saying that why are you exporting wheat distributed to the poor through the public distribution system? Is there merit in that argument?
No, I think of course there is. I mean, if people are going hungry, you should beef up our distribution system. But the point is you have enough, more than the buffer norm. So you have excess. And that excess can't be stored, as Mr. Arora was saying. I think so that exporting that doesn't conflict with distribution. I mean, distribution is a different aspect which we actually have not been able to prop up the way it should be. So I think that's a different issue. But right now we have more wheat than we require and more wheat than we can store. So what
more
do you do
wheat than we require, but more mouths to feed as well, because right now the government is not universalizing the distribution of food, and that's something that the activists have been demanding, that distribute more food grains. So that's where this entire debate comes as to whether the export should happen. The other issue, Mr. Joshi, really is the flip-flop in policy with regard to food grains export, and that's something that in fact many companies and countries have raised, that India just doesn't seem to have a consistent policy with regard to exporting food grains.
Well, I agree that we should have more pragmatic approach towards exports, and I think should also have a clearly defined policy and should react very quickly to. Sometimes we don't import when there is need to import, and the prices go up. So I think there is need to rationalize on that front.
Would you agree?
Yeah, 100% agree that whenever there is a requirement to export, it should be. You see, what happens is if you are exporting it, like you said, that policy is not consistent. So we are treated in the international market as bad suppliers. They say whether next year you're going to export or you're going to ban. So they never take us seriously. They don't give us the price. Like today we are $200, $300 cheaper than Thailand only because of that.
Because of our inconsistency in policy, the flip-flop that we've seen.
I think the policy should be that they never should ban the exports. When there is a shortage, which is hardly there is. If you see in the last 10 years, we never had a shortage. So it is only the mindset that we can have a shortage. For that mindset, we should not allow ever to ban the exports. But whenever there is a requirement, we can always import, not an issue. So it should be always a consistent policy so that we can be treated as a good supplier in the international market, and we can make a dent in that.
All right, Dr. Nayak, whenever we are faced with situations like these, what comes into focus is yet again the faulty public distribution system, the need to actually strengthen that public distribution system. Year after year, especially around this time, we have this discussion and debate. Has the government moved forward in any way to address that situation meaningfully?
What I feel is, the steps taken to improve the public distribution system has been very, very slow. If you look at the public distribution system in different states, what we feel is, only about 75% of the allocated is actually taken by the states and actually distributed. Again, there is also a lot of inefficiency in distribution itself. We don't have good data systems to really see what is happening. We don't have a good delivery mechanism through which we could actually ensure that the offtake of the food grains are actually reaching the the target people. Though we have such a good possibility through technology to improve the delivery mechanism, somehow we have not really made much progress in that, and because of that we have many of these problems like lot of people going hungry, not enough food, though we have buffer stock, though we have a lot more stock than we require. So all these problems come in because we don't have an efficient delivery mechanism, and I don't think we are really doing much on really improving the efficiency of the delivery mechanism.
All right, Mr. Mishra, steps that the government should start thinking about right now, given the kind of numbers that Jatin was telling us and the worst case scenario that we're projecting here. What are the steps that the government should start taking almost immediately? Because we always see the government seem to be reacting a bit too late to situations like these.
What I feel that we should not as yet lose hope, and we still feel that the monsoon will be reasonably good, but at the same time one cannot remain complacent, assuming that there could be some problem, there could be deficient rainfall and crop loss and lack of sowing and so on. The contingency plans should be kept in readiness. All the states and even at the district level, they have contingency plans for crop that is based on the agroclimatic situations, and for example, if there is further delay in rainfall in a particular area, then instead of the crop which is generally sown, there are alternative crops which are already planted. Similarly, if the crop which has been sown gets damaged, then there is a need to make available seeds for alternative crops. In other words, the contingency plans should be activated immediately, and for that purpose what we need is preparedness and also readiness to mitigate the impact of deficient monsoon in case it arises. But as of now, I feel at least for a week or 10 days more we still have time, and for many crops it of course depends on agroclimatic situation. For example, for groundnut and cotton crop, the situation appeared to be very dismal about 4 or 5 days ago, but with some rains during the last 2 or 3 days, the situation has improved. So in short, what I am trying to say is that we should not lose hope, and we should make all efforts to ensure that agricultural inputs are readily available to farmers. At the same time, the contingency plans should be activated, and for that purpose we must be in readiness.
All right, contingency plans that need to be activated, which is exactly the point that we are making, that hope the government seems to be activating those contingency plans. Jatin, you were talking about the reservoir situation looking terrible as well. What are the numbers?
You see, I don't want to come across as the only panelist who's the
because everyone seems to be living in hope, and there's hope.
You see, I lead a company of science and I can only talk numbers. Now, You see, there are 84 reservoirs in this country, and this is government. These are government numbers. 74% are 40% or below. Punjab, Bhakra is 16% of its total capacity at this point of time. Theni is at 26%. Sri Salem in Andhra Pradesh, which has got some rain, is at 14%. Nagarjuna Sagar at 17%. Mula in Maharashtra is at 0. I hope it doesn't get me personally into trouble. The idea is not, there is a line about where you don't really press a panic button, but you've got to err on the side of caution. I hope, and it should go above 30%, but with these numbers right now, I think the calculation should be more conservative.
Don't you think the government should already be in panic mode given the numbers that Jatin is telling us? Why always keep hoping that things will improve? Too early to say the situation is going to improve. Shouldn't we already start pressing that panic button and putting the contingency plan in place before it's actually too late, Mr.
I'm sure they would be putting in. I think we have enough experience of droughts in the last couple of years to be ready with a contingency plan. And I think as far as the reservoir position is concerned, I think generally it is low in the month of June. I think reservoirs get filled up towards the end of the season. So I think the numbers don't look very good, but I think if rains are good, then you'll see the reservoirs filling up also. 2009-10 actually we got bad rains, but the GDP growth was 8.4%. I think that was the year when there was a lot of stimulus given to the system. So stimulus kept it alive. I think unfortunately this time we don't have the fiscal muscle to give that stimulus.
On the contrary, we're faced with a slowdown and absolutely no fiscal room.
Yeah.
So in that sense, isn't this year looking particularly bleak, because we perhaps should not look at any negative triggers, and that one negative trigger of a bad monsoon can pull down India badly.
Well, I think monsoon is very hard to predict. Every year the month of June generates the same kind of anxiety. I mean, unless if there is a little bit of shortfall on the monsoon front, I think the speculation starts.
We start having discussions like these.
Absolutely. I think, but the point is, we should actually have a contingency plan. We should always be prepared, and drought, history shows, can be managed. I mean, if you have a good contingency plan, it can be managed properly.
What about farmers and the possibility of the government looking at already some relief packages for farmers? Is that something that the government should start contemplating already? Because remember, they are the ones who are at the receiving end of this poor monsoon, and the spate of farmer suicides that we've seen in the country even over the last few months. Is that a cause of worry, Mr. Joshi?
It is. I think it's always a cause of worry. But I think now the issue is how will you help them get over this situation? I mean, one simple thing is debt loan waivers. I mean, which actually create a moral hazard problem, because I think then the expectation gets built that I think
each time there's going to be.
But so I think so that's why I think a proper contingency plan where farmers are provided with support. I mean, not merely debt relief. I think that's what is required.
Can I just add to this? I think if the government rolls out weather-based crop insurance schemes much more aggressively, quickly, and also tries to enroll non-loany farmers to create that larger base, because the cover that people are really looking for is deficit rainfall. It seems, and I hope it doesn't happen. Really, I do not want this to happen. But if you create that kind of net right now, and then the opportunity is still there, especially for late sown crops, maybe you'll be able to get to more people faster. And the good part of weather-based crop insurance is that it's not only the government system. The private insurance companies have a system, have distribution, have databases, and they can roll this out quickly.
Clearly, the government needs to get more innovative when it comes to dealing with situations like these. A poor monsoon is clearly something that the government cannot afford at a time when we're seeing a clear slowdown in the economy, the situation of farmers clearly worsening. We bring you the story of what's really happening in Rajasthan. Here's Rajan Mahan with his special report.
Being on his fields is no joy for Bhavarlal these days. He and his brother had ploughed their fields in early June to sow bajra crops on their land in Jaipur's Tejawala village. But with no rain in the past 20 days, his hopes are fading and fears escalating.
बरसात नापास हुई तो जनता री बकमजोरी रात दिन की नींद उड़ रही है। भगवान बरसात को नहीं तो कहीं लो आपनो कहीं तो जानवरान पड़ना कि आप पड़ना कि हम बच्चे बच्चे पढ़ाऊँगा खुआऊँगा कहीं.
Given repeated droughts, Bhavar, like most farmers in Rajasthan, was greatly relieved by the good monsoon last year. He hoped to repay his 3 lakh rupee debts and marry his daughter if the rain gods remain kind this time. But the delayed monsoon is now intensifying his misery.
बरसात नहीं पैदा को नहीं किया हम पैदा नहीं तो ब्याह शादी काम कराना बिना पैदा पैसा कौन दे लो कर जो कड़ा लिया वो काम देना.
Rainfall in all 33 districts of Rajasthan has so far been 79% less than normal, and the weather department's prediction of rains in the next few days is now the only ray of hope for farmers like Bhavar. In the desert state, which suffers 7 droughts every 10 years, farmers are now keeping a close eye on every twist of the monsoon, and each day that now passes off without any rains is intensifying the fears of farmers here. In Tejawala village, Rajan Mahan for NDTV.
Clearly, the plight of farmers across the country, a big cause of worry there, perhaps increasing the minimum support price. Is that really a solution to the kind of plight that we're witnessing with regard to farmers?
Of course, I think because the farmer will suffer if there is a bad monsoon. Even if we manage, but the farmer has to suffer. And the only way with the government is that if they can afford, they must increase the MSP of their product to scale it up.
Well, that immediately feeds into inflation.
Absolutely. That was my next point, that already has its inflationary.
Yeah, absolutely.
So clearly no easy answers, but the only thing that the government can do right now is hope against hope that this isn't going to be another drought year, and we're going to see the monsoon pick up very quickly. We'll have to wait and see how the rain gods really respond to that one, but for now at least, big worries out there with regard to a deficient monsoon. We've run out of time on the discussion. Thanks all for joining us and sharing your views. Remember, you can send us your feedback on We Mean Business. The details there coming up on your screen. You can send us an email at wmb@ndtv.com. You can send me your messages on my Twitter handle at ShwetaRKNDTV, or you can send us an SMS at WMB space your message at 56388. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.